Hey guys, welcome to the 8th podcast of Blossom House. Today we're going to be discussing racism, and it's an issue that's prevalent in a lot of countries, US, Canada, and it's an important issue to talk about. So let's start with um, any personal experiences or opinions on racism. Let's start general.
I don't think I've really had any really bad encounters with racism. For the most part, I've been living a pretty sheltered life. I know for my parents, they've definitely encountered racism, not necessarily even here in Canada, like even in Bangladesh where they're from. There's definitely a bias against skin color, even though you're all like Bengali. There's like racism also informs beauty standards. So there's this Eurocentric belief that white skin is like more it's better than dark skin. So there's that kind of racism as well, which is really interesting. I don't think we talk enough about racism, not just like to like we don't really talk about how colored people can also be racist towards other colored people. Like I don't hear that as often, but I see it a lot in my family.
Mm-hmm. Like that sort of thinking is very prevalent in places like India, for example, because they have literal products that are designed to make your face lighter, like Fair and Lovely and stuff like that. And it's very much a beauty standard where you're trying to get lighter skin. But me specifically, I don't think I've dealt with any sorts of racism either. But I do know that there's things happening, like, for example, I don't know if you guys have heard of the thing with someone who's running for something in U of A. Um,
Oh, the
yeah,
counselor. Yeah. I forgot his
yeah,
name.
I think he's
Harum Ali.
Bengali.
Yeah. Harun
Yeah,
Ali or
and
something.
he's facing racism in that way, and to me, it was sort of like a shock because like it seems like Edmonton is pretty racially diverse, or at least like there's a lot of brown people here, right? And so like in my head, I don't know why I thought like it wouldn't be like that, but it is happening, and so it's like weird to see.
Wait, I don't think I've heard about that story before. Do you mind like giving a quick explanation of what's been happening?
I will pull this up on Instagram, but basically there's an arts counselor, so for like they have a students union at U of A, and what was happening is he was facing like all sorts of Islamophobic and racist comments towards him. Um I don't know where it is right now. I'm so sorry. U of A SU. I cannot find their Instagram page, but that's basically what's been happening. And it's kind of unexpected, but in a lot of ways it's also not. Um, there's been a lot of outpouring of violence towards Asian communities, especially from the pandemic. I think it's exacerbated a lot of. I'm so sorry. A lot of like Asian hate. Like I'm sure you've seen posts about how there's been a lot of Asian violence in the States, but here as well. Even recently, my parents, like yesterday, they were telling me how there was an Indian boy who came here from India for his undergraduate studies who was shot when he was going to his part-time job, and they're trying to figure out if it's racially motivated or not. It's suspected that it is. So
And there's also like another thing that is kind of shocking is I think it was in grade 11 where you were hearing about like white supremacist groups forming in high schools. Like I think it was Skona or
oh
something
yes.
where they were forming, and I remember hearing about it. And I'm like, that's so dumb. What? Like, not to
It's
say that you can't be proud of like your race. Like, sure, go be proud of being white, but also I don't really see a need to form a group that's designed specifically for like white people, because that also brings up the topic of like there's racism, right? But is it different when you're being racist towards a white person? Because to me, there's like it's definitely still a bad thing, but there's differences because there isn't necessarily a history of systematic like oppression and abuse because of someone's race, like it has been for Black people, for example.
I think for the most part, I agree with you. I just don't like the idea of like fighting racism with also being
Mhm.
like racist towards someone. But I understand that for the most part, the system is privileged towards white people. It's not as easy for people of color. So I don't think systematic racism plays a huge part against white people. It's mostly like maybe individual racism. There's definitely people, if you can be colored, you can still be racist towards anyone, even a white person. That's what I think. Oh, wonderful. Okay. um,
I'm not gonna mute my mic.
okay.
Keep talking.
I mean, I had nothing else to say. I can think of something. Emily, what are your opinions on this? Sorry for throwing you off with the
In terms of like racism against white people, I don't
honestly,
think it like exists. And if it does, it's not like that big of a problem, right? Because like I can't even think of any specific targeted slurs against white people that like I don't know aren't funny. Like the only thing I can think of is cracker and sorry, but I think that's funny. Like I know how like against other communities, there are slurs against them, right? But for white people, if cracker is like the worst thing you can think of, then maybe racism against them just isn't like that big of a problem. Yeah.
yeah, like I said, I don't think it's like a you. Most people aren't like discriminating against the whole group. I still do see like instances, like even on YouTube. I forgot what the video was called, but there was a bunch of people. I forgot what they were doing. They were like competing for money or something, and then there were some colored people who were using race to their advantage and playing themselves out as a victim for like everything, and it was just kind of getting annoying. Like, sure, racism is a thing, but I don't think you should be playing racism as some sort of card to get something that you want.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's just yeah, my opinion on it. Hmm.
And like, I know originally, like racism is something that historically stemmed, like, well, you could say part of it is stemmed from fear. Like, for example, after 9/11, there's a lot of racism against like Middle Eastern people of color because there was like an increased fear in and there was like more connections that people were drawing between terrorism and these specific groups of people, and then they just made it 10 times like more magnified by just assuming like, oh, this is a person of color, they have this specific last name and they're from this specific race, and so we're just going to automatically assume that they are like a bad person, right? And so there's all these like generalizations that are like stemming from fear and then just making it and turning it into racism.
I think like a lot of these opportunities when there's heightened fear because of something, whether that's a pandemic we're seeing now or from 9/11, it's also an excuse for a lot of extremist groups who are like outwardly racist to just be even more outwardly racist and violent towards people of color. Maybe we should also talk about it was a big rage in June 2020, the Black Lives Matter movement. It's still obviously very relevant, but it was even more relevant then because of George Floyd's killing that gained a lot of traction all over the world. So,
Yeah, I think this was also around the time where the GONA White Students Alliance that we mentioned was made. Like, I
oh
think it
yeah,
was made in response to that, or like around the time. Yeah,
Wait, sorry, in response to what?
in response to like the Black Lives Matter movement getting like more attention.
Um,
that's interesting because there was also I'm not sure when All Lives Matter originated, but it did in response to the Black Lives Matter movement. I think a big part of it is that we're not like the movement isn't trying to necessarily devalue other lives, but it's trying to emphasize that there has been a lot of unnecessary violence from police towards Black people, and we have to question why is that happening. For it's not just one instance; it's repeated instances that they're trying to emphasize.
I also think that if you're focusing more on the fact that your group isn't being focused on right now when there's another group that's like in need of this awareness and this attention. Like I think that's something that you need to like reevaluate on how important you are, like how deeply you're looking into these issues, because if you're looking at this Black Lives Matter movement and you're thinking, oh, but what about my group, that just means that you're really not paying attention to what is happening as much as you should be.
I'd like to add on that some interesting stuff we're seeing in it right now is a lot of people take offense to being called a racist. Like, obviously, it's not a good thing to be racist. Like, but I'm trying to say that just because you're racist doesn't necessarily mean you're a completely bad person. Because a lot of the times you're not even aware that maybe you have some biases and prejudices. Like everyone has that, but if there's so much resistance to someone pointing out that hey, this isn't very nice of you to say, this might come off as being racist, then it it's really hard to get those people to open up their minds and see that what they're doing is wrong, because it's not just the people who are hard pressed racists, but it's also people who masquerade as being very liberal but are stubborn towards change. And there's a lot of, like, you even see in the United States, like you can't even talk about racism anymore. Like you have that critical race theory being banished from schools. You can't talk about anything about like biases, prejudices, even though it definitely exists. So if we can't talk about it, then how can you expect any change?
Mm-hmm. I agree. And in terms of the critical race theory, it doesn't make sense to me to erase the topic of prejudice and bias, because then you're also erasing a part of history, right? Because a huge part of history has been prejudice and has been bias and has been racism. And so if you're not going to allow free discussion on those topics, you're erasing all the struggles that people went through, and also you're erasing the mistakes that your country and your government has done in the past. And that's not ever a good starting point if you want to make things better or if you want things to change, because it's like you're ignoring the fact that it ever happened in the first place.
On the topic of like history and everything, and I know how we discussed that we agree that critical race theory should be taught in schools because it teaches us to like reevaluate our biases and prejudices about like people of different races. But like on that topic, what do we feel about like Confederate statues and statues of historical figures who are like known to be racist? Like, how do we feel about leaving those up or tearing them down?
I think a lot of places, like, they're starting to tear them down, right? Was it Christopher Columbus statues that are being torn down or something like that?
It's like
I can't
And
almost
I
remember.
know
every
like schools
statue.
are being
Yeah.
renamed, like John A. McDonald or something, right?
Mhm.
Hmm. I'm not exactly the best, like, perspective, I think, because, like, I don't know what the reasonings are to keep them still standing. Like, is it because they're a huge part of history? Like, oh, they were part of Confederation. They built this like country, and so we're keeping the statue up to remember that. But then the other side is like they did some terrible things, and in a time where we're trying to like improve, we don't really want this reminder to be what defines us. And like having this statue in an important place is sort of telling us that that is what you value rather than these new things that you should be trying to encourage.
My opinion on this is that I don't think it's necessarily right to. I don't actually know about statues specifically, but I think that history for a long time you've been talking from the eyes of like white people, so you haven't really gotten a more broader perspective of what has happened, and that's made a lot of people angry because they want history to be portrayed more accurately. But I don't know if it's right to just tear statues down because you're trying to ignore, like you're trying to erase certain parts of history as well. Like I think we should talk about, sure, they did this, but they also did a bunch of bad things. Like there should be some sort of balance. I don't know how you would go about doing that. Maybe in schools, definitely reformulate the curriculum even though right now it seems to be going backward in a lot of places. But yes.
Yeah. One point I've heard for tearing down statues is that like you're not doing much learning when you're placing a statue commemorating some of the achievements in a public place. Like you're doing most of your learning in like a classroom or a museum. And I think the alternative they proposed was that we move the statues to museums so we can like actually learn more about them and learn like a more nuanced view of what they've done, other than the fact that like, yeah, John A. Macdonald like built Canada. Like they also learn about the less appealing things of history that he's partaken in. So yeah, that was a point that I've heard. Yeah, I was like, yeah, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. In her schools, even like I didn't even know Christopher Columbus did a bunch of terrible things until like I got access to the internet. Like we just never learned about it.
Mhm.
So I was like, oh yeah, he's a pretty cool guy. Like no, so so there definitely needs to be some change in the curriculum.
Hmm.
Oh, on
Um,
I'm so
yeah.
sorry. This is a kind of
Oh.
random note, but I was reading an article about like a black student was saying how in their school, this was in Ontario or Ottawa, I believe. So they were saying that they brought up the topic of racism and their teacher shut it down and said, "Don't use that word. There's just some people are more privileged than others." And I just found that so in some way it's so pathetic. It was funny because like you're trying to deny like a whole thing exists. We know it exists. Why can you not say the word? It's kind of like Voldemort. You cannot say his name. Like, it still exists, bro. So I think you're doing more
I
worse
mean,
by not like you're doing an injustice towards children by not acknowledging it's real. Like they know it's real and they're just gonna feel like they've been cheated when they go into like higher classes. Maybe they'll take an elective on um I don't know what the class would be, but there's definitely courses that exist where they talk about like race and stuff, and they're like, I had no idea there was so much inequality, and they'll get angry. So you're doing an injustice. You can't talk about it.
hmm, hmm. Okay, so we brought up the Black Lives movement, the Black Lives Matter movement. Let's circle back to that because I think there's probably more that we can discuss in terms of that. So, we discussed like Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter movement. But another big part of the movement was also like just in terms of police brutality, right? There was that whole ACAB thing going on, where people were calling for like a rebuilding or like a destruction of the system because it was like systematically like designed to be against black people.
I think this kind of fits into the whole idea of systematic racism, how racism isn't just perpetrated by individual bias or prejudice, but it's also built into a lot of our institutions and it creates unequal outcomes between different groups. And we see that in the police force as well, like certain targeting of black people, which is it's kind of it's weird because it's happened so often and yet there's no change. So a lot of people are calling for like defund the police, which is basically like bring it back to the table. Why is this happening? Because in recent years we've been seeing a lot of militarization of the police and lots of money going towards them, and people don't really understand why that's happening. So
Mm-hmm. I also think it's an important thing to like when I hear that, I'm not really sure. Like to me, whenever you call for a change, it's hard to see to have that change happen unless you can bring in a like real means of achieving that goal, right? So you can call for like taking down the system or rebuilding it, but I think you also have to start smaller. Like in my opinion, that starts with like the most basic thing is just educating the children and also just educating police officers who come in. Like they need to take training in terms of how to treat the people that they are dealing with because a lot like these police brutality cases are definitely racially charged, right? And so like there are certain things that they need to be taught about in order to hopefully like decrease that because we like you have to take bad things happening. Did I cut off?
Yeah, you cut off of it. Can you repeat your last part?
I don't know. When did I stop?
I don't know either.
I don't know.
Yeah, I just cut off. I was like,
Okay,
oh.
carry on.
No, what was your? Just repeat your last
I
sentence.
don't even.
Just repeat your
I-
last sentence.
Just
How
repeat your
about
last sentence.
Um.
We won't laugh. We'll help you concentrate.
No, I can't remember.
Okay, you know what? We will keep going. I think you were on like police, like re-educating the police when they come in. I was thinking like a lot of the times people are so resistant to even like learning about this stuff. Like I already talked about how like being like called racist is such a bad thing now. Like that you should not be calling people racist for no reason. But even the fact that you could be insinuating something that's kind of discriminatory, it people take it so um very personal when it shouldn't be that personal. It's just about re-educating you. Everyone has biases. I think they just need to think about them. Like we all have biases. It shouldn't be that personal.
I also think that sometimes like people are like it's possible to have like those racially charged biases and then not even realize that like you have them, right? Because for example in The Hate You Give, which was like really big when the whole movement was happening, there's like the one white character who's um friends with the main character who is black, but she says things that are like so rude and like racially charged against black people, and she doesn't even realize that it's like borderline racist things, right? And so it's this thing where you have to be able to call these people out on the things they're saying, because otherwise they're also never going to learn that what they're saying is not okay, right? And so it all starts from an education standpoint, which is why it's so important to have these open discussions in schools, because if you don't learn from a young age that some behaviors and some things to say are not okay, then it's just going to be harder to unlearn your like biases and stereotypes that you've internalized when you grow older.
Okay.
Anyone have another topic to bring up? There's more topics. I just don't know how to like.
Smoothly, yeah. I was thinking about it.
On the topic of like activism such as ACAB and defund the police, at what point does your activism like become performative? Because I think that was also a big
Oh,
issue.
yeah, that's true.
What do you mean by performative?
Like people
Like
like
performative
oh,
activism.
okay, like report. So basically it's kind of like maybe not necessarily even famous people. Famous people do it a lot, but anyone who's just like doing activism for the sake of gaining positive attention from, usually it's through social media, like from their followers, like, oh look guys, I'm doing this great thing, but they're not really actually invested in the cause. They're just doing
Mhm.
it for clout. That's basically
Yeah,
perform.
like it's super surface level, like kind of just
Mm,
posting ACAB in your Instagram bio, but never really doing anything to like, I don't know, try and re-educate yourself or like stop supporting companies that, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
It's like I think we also talked about this in the previous podcast. Like, um, to what extent is someone's intentions an effect on the thing that they're doing? Like, does someone who's doing a good thing have to have good intentions when they do that good thing? Like, if the person is helping raise awareness, I guess that's always a good thing. But I think also, like, if they're not, like, intentional about it, or they're just doing it so that they have a nice picture on their Instagram, it also means that maybe the things that they're putting out on their platform aren't necessarily like the most accurate or with the most amount of like care for the thing that they're trying to promote, right? I don't know if I'm explaining this right.
I think I get what you're saying. Like, if it's really obvious that you're doing performative activism, then it kind of devalues the cause. It's showing the
Mhm.
people who follow you or whatever that, oh, if they're performing this as some sort of positive thing, then maybe it's not really that big of a deal. And if it's performative activism, like, how much effort are they really putting into what news they get? So, is this news even accurate? It could harm the cause significantly.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think
Another, oh yeah, go ahead.
okay. Yeah, I think like one example of this was back in February. I don't know how long ago this was, when there was Blackout Tuesday and everyone just posted a black square and hashtag like Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Tuesday, Black Out Tuesday on their Instagram page, and the amount of black squares posted under the hashtag actually like kind of flooded out all of the information regarding the protests and the movement, and like yeah, you basically could get any resources and stuff. And so yeah, that was like one instance when performative activism, in this case posting a black square on your Instagram, was like really detrimental towards the cause that you were like claiming to be supporting.
Wait. Okay. I never heard about this. So they posted a black square and then they put a swear in
Yeah,
their cap. Then what is the
Yeah.
it
point
was
of
supposed to
posting the
be
black?
like this sort of like in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. So everyone would post just like a plain black square and then like tag it Blackout Tuesday. But then it's just like flooding people's timelines, right? And then also like the tags for it, and then like you're not getting any real information on
Oh,
the
okay.
important things.
Oh,
Yeah, because a
mm.
black square doesn't really tell you like where to donate, which petitions to sign. It just tells you that like there's a black square, which is not very helpful to most people.
Mhm.
That's true.
Another like issue in terms of activism, especially during that time, was like to what extent these can these movements turn to violence and still um, like elicit a good response.
I think I remember talking about this with my dad a few years ago, like 2 years back, when the George Floyd killing happened and the Black Lives movement got violent. And a lot of the violent instances weren't even people who were part of the movement; they were just there to sabotage the movement. So there was that, but there was also people who were being violent. To some extent, I can understand the violence because there's been so little action towards solving any of the issues regarding like police brutality that people are just so frustrated that they take it out in the form of violence. But at the same time, violence does hurt the cause because people start to view it as illegitimate.
Mm-hmm. Like I'm not really sure. Like obviously you would start peaceful, right? And I but at the, it escalated to like they were attacking like police officers, I think, and they were like smashing storefronts and things like that. Um, and it's like to at a certain point, it's just becoming problematic, and like you said, it's just making people more reluctant to support the movement because it's like, are you really trying to fight for your cause, or are you just using this as an excuse to like get violent?
But at the same time, I feel like a lot of groups like magnify these instances of violence to try and decredit the movement. And I think that yeah, it was really exaggerated, especially on some media sources like Fox News, right? Like they would kind of just take one instance of violence and kind of paint the entire movement to be like that, when in reality I don't think that's actually how it was.
Yeah, Fox News is not very credible. And I think there's been a lot of attention towards like the violence that the protesters were doing. Only not all, obviously, some, but there wasn't a lot of attention on maybe like police trying to contain the
Police
crowd. Like,
brutality, yeah.
yeah. So I
There
was
was
like,
also a
wait,
lot of police like violence where they're dealing with peaceful protesters and they're using like straight up
the
I don't know what
taser
they're called. Those like
tase.
gun
Yeah.
things that
Like the
shoot like
smoke, right?
sorry,
Yes.
what?
The smoke or
Or the
Yeah, like
tase
also
things.
like the tear gas. There's
yeah,
also like the things that shoot like BB pellets or something and they like
or like rubber
bruise
bullets.
you.
Mm.
Yeah, and all these things and then you have to focus on all sides of the story if you want to make it accurate, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so when we're talking about racism, there's there was like that period where we were really focused on Black Lives Matter, right? And there's also other like racism in terms of like, for example, Asian minorities, which we've touched on in the beginning. Um, but there was also like a slight increase in racism after COVID, specifically towards like Asian groups because of the fact that COVID originated in China, right? Um, and it's also like one thing is I remember a lot of people were angry that Trump during his time as the president would like refer to it as like the Chinese virus, right? And they were saying that it's like you are the president, right? And so, to a certain extent, you have to understand that the way that you word things and the things that you say are obviously going to have certain effects to the people that you are like talking to, right? And so, like maybe you can say that you didn't mean that in a racist or malicious way, but people are obviously going to take that and use it as a justification that yeah, this is all because of China and Chinese people, and this is who we should be blaming, right? And so you have to be like, when you're in positions of power, you also have to be aware of the things that you say. I,
And like you said, it's so hypocritical that these people, like Donald Trump, even said it himself. I'm not racist. I was like, really? They just like they will say
Mans
racist.
wanted to build
Yeah.
a wall to prevent
Um,
people from
from
Mexico from
coming
coming in. Are
in.
you really telling me you're not a little racist?
It goes back to that point of people don't want to confront their biases and prejudices, but also don't want to be called racist. So
Mhm.
yeah, interesting. I can't. Well, I've been thinking about this one instance. I don't even know if this is racism, but it feels kind of targeted. I'm sure a lot of Asian people, especially brown people, have felt this way at some point when they go to security at an airport. It's just. It's very. They'll always at some point they'll call you up, or the metal detector will ring, or the security guard, or whoever the airport personnel will come to you, and they'll be like, "We need to check your entire luggage when no one else around you has had that happen to them." So it's kind. I don't know if that's. I don't think that's racism. I think that's part of the system. I think the system needs to change because I've heard it happen to so many people of color that it's actually not even funny anymore. It's kind of like, what is going on? Why is it just us? Increased a lot after 9/11. Like I can get that obviously you're wary, but I don't think calling random people out, well, I guess it might be helpful, but at some point, like you're calling out so many innocent people that you're just like, "What are you doing?" Yeah.
I don't think I've personally dealt with a lot of that. Maybe I just don't travel that much. But whenever I do get stopped, it's because I'm wearing tons of jewelry.
Oh yeah.
And so they're like, take off all of your jewelry. I'm like, I'm wearing like anklets, I'm wearing bracelets, I'm wearing a necklace. Um, and even when I take that all off, like I remember one time I was walking through and they just kept like hearing a beep and I'm like, I'm
At this
not wearing
point,
a
I
belt.
ate
You can
something
literally
metallic. I'm
check.
so
I'm not
sorry.
wearing a belt. And so she was like, what do you have there? I'm like, I don't know.
I ate some
I'm
metal.
literally
I'm so
not wearing
sorry.
anything. I didn't even have like a jeans button or anything. There was literally no metal. And then finally she was just like, you know what, you can just go. I'm like, okay.
I'm so sorry. We're done with you. We don't even care that if you might be a terrorist, but whatever. You're so done with you. Oh my god. Yeah. What about you, Emily?
I also don't fly that much, but I have never gotten checked in the airport. Like, yeah, they're just like, go, I guess.
That's good. Maybe.
um,
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, no,
This
you
is
go ahead. I
another
was
random
just
tangent. I was remembering this one time when I was at the airport, and then I accidentally walked behind a security guard. I was like 8, okay, and then the security guard whipped their head around and was like, "How dare you be behind me?" And I was like, "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I just wanted to get my luggage." I'm 8 years old.
The security guard was really
He was
like,
really
this
pissed.
8-year-old was about to pull out a knife and they were about to do something. They were going to attack me. Like,
And I was so scared my parents were gonna say something, and they were just like, "It's not even your fault. She was probably having a really, really bad day."
she just
Like,
probably just
thank
having a
God.
bad day, guys.
Like
It's
I was more
okay.
scared of what my parents would say, but no, my life was saved. It was good.
Okay, so another topic is like in terms of racism, right? There are certain times where like racist comments are allowed to pass because like they're jokes of the race that you are, right? So like there's like I am allowed to make brown jokes because I am brown. And no one can say anything because it's my own race, right? Um, but like I can't make, for example, black jokes because I'm not black, and that's like not my thing to joke about, right? So it's sort of interesting to see that sort of thing. Um, and it's also interesting when you get people who are like they might be a certain race, but they don't look that race, and so they're not allowed to use those jokes, right? It's like very selective.
Okay, on that topic, this also brings up the idea of like when you're mixed race, you not only face racism from like one section, it's like from it's really hard to fit in because a lot of times there's racism from like your mom's side of the family and your dad's side, like whatever the races are, it's really hard to fit in. So there's that too. Oh my god. Okay.
Sorry, I'm
Yeah.
anyways. Another thing on that topic is like, you know how like there's a lot of things where, for example, um, you're like black people are taking back control over a word that has previously been used like against them, and so they're like taking back control of that. Same thing with like indigenous people taking back control over the word Indian, right? Like that used to be something that people would like use in a sort of like derogatory sort of way, and so like they're taking control of that to be able to use for their themselves. And so I don't know, you're seeing a lot where certain things are accessible to some races and not others because there's systematic and historical evidence of it being used in the wrong way, if that makes sense.
This kind of reminds me of Thomas King's book that we read last year about Inconvenient Indian. And I don't know if this was in his book or if it was an interview when he was saying that it doesn't really even matter if it's like Indian, First Nations, Aboriginals, because all of these names were given by people who came here. We don't even
Mm-hmm.
call ourselves that necessarily. So I don't even know. I'm sure it might be about taking back control. I think it's a big part, but it's also like how much do these names mean if they I don't even know if I'm phrasing this right because like they were made by other people. It doesn't does it
Mm-hmm.
still describe them? I don't know. Can't speak from them for them. But yeah. Okay.
Okay. Then, like, last point of the day, I think, is talking about representation of minorities and people of different color in the media. So we're seeing a rise of shows that showcase different races. There's a lot of Asian based shows popping up. I think there's some um, like I wouldn't say like Indian shows, but like the main character is Indian, so in Never Have I Ever and shows like that. So there's definitely like an increase. And I think it's really important that kids growing up see someone that looks like them on screen, um, rather than always seeing someone that like they don't look like. So that like kids also strive to be the things that they see on TV, right? And so it's important that they have a role model that like is accurate to them, I think.
I know growing up as a kid, I saw a lot of Disney shows, and then there wasn't much, there was like barely any representation for who I was. Like, I remember Jasmine was representing like so many different cultures, and she wasn't even like, she was Middle Eastern, I think. I don't remember. But like,
I genuinely
I
don't
have
know
no idea what she is anymore.
what culture
She's,
she is. Her
I,
tiger is named like what is it named
Raj?
Raj?
Yeah, which sounds Indian. But then,
I don't know.
yeah, so I was like, okay. But it's great that we have more of Asian shows coming out, just different,
Mm-hmm.
lots of representation. One thing I also wanted to talk about was in Bollywood, so Indian movies. This is just more about like skin tone. Like a lot of actresses and actors, like they're completely
They're
whitewashed.
light.
Yeah, so we don't have that much even dark skin representation in Bollywood, which is really, it's kind of surprising. So even in that industry, there's a lot of racism towards darker skinned people.
I know, like growing up as a kid, there was one show that it was called. What was it called? I think it was called How to Be Indie, and it was like a
I
whole show
remember
where the
that
whole
show.
family was just like Indian people, and it was like a regular like I think it was like a Disney Channel show. I can't remember,
Yeah.
but it was like that made me so happy as a kid because they were like a South Indian family. They looked like me. They spoke like me. Um, and so, like, watching a show like that, that meant a lot to me as a kid. I don't think I've seen a show like that ever since then. So I think it's really important that there's more of those types of things for kids to watch.
Not just in movies as well, but also in literature. Like
Mm.
all the time, there'll be
Yeah.
characters who are like, "Oh yeah, they have blue eyes and blonde hair." I'm like, "Oh well."
Wow,
Again,
they look
I'm
like
going to get it
me.
mixed up with another book character who has the exact same personality. Wonderful. So more representation in literature too. Yes, we are seeing a lot of it now, though. Well, more of it. Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Have we talked? I don't know. I'm kind of forgetting things. Have we talked a lot about systematic racism as well today? I think so.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Okay. All right.
I think we can probably start to close off then. So, ending remarks. What can we personally do to combat racism?
OMG. Okay. Sorry about my desk. Um, I think a big part of it is we have to, from the individual level, we have to evaluate our own biases and prejudices, which is obviously going to be hard because you need to critique yourself, which is always a hard thing to do, but it's necessary if we want any change for our society. Like, you can't really teach your children or anyone around you when you can't even teach yourself first. So, re education on a personal level is definitely a step. On a more societal level, I think we have to, it, racism, we can't really, in my opinion, we can't really apply racist free, this sounds so bad, okay, so but like laws without addressing racism. Like if you're trying to combat racism, you have to acknowledge that people always see in color, that's where we're at right now. People have biases. So if we're going to make laws, we have to acknowledge that racism is a thing in order for any change to exist. Because if we have like laws, sorry, Susie, what are you doing? Anyways, if we
Sorry.
have laws trying to completely erase stuff like critical race theory and ban talking about racism in classrooms in an attempt to try get rid of racism, that's still not going to erase the problem.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes
I also
sense.
think it's important to point out that there's a difference between funding equality of the races and like erasing race altogether, right? Because obviously, who you are is partly defined by your race and by your culture. And so, like, the whole point of combating racism is not to erase that, but to make sure that every race is given equal opportunity and treated equally, not like not like forgetting about their race, but looking at it and seeing it as equal to any other, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I also think it's important to listen to people when they say that, like, yeah, you're being racist, and kind of take that time to reflect on yourself and maybe just reevaluate your biases and prejudices.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Hmm. With that being
Okay,
said,
guys.
yeah,
That's
let's
it for this podcast. We will see you on the next one. Bye.
bye. Thank you.